In this lesson, let's discuss the disk drive components. So what makes up a disk drive? So in a quick overview, let's talk about the components at a high level. Platters. Platter is the metallic disk that stores data. The read-write head, like it sounds, reads and writes data that resides on the platter. The actuator arm is the device that moves the read-write head back and forth. The spindle motor is a component in the middle of the platter that allows the platter to spin. And finally, the controller is where the brains or the logic of the hard drive is located. So let's dive into each one of these in more detail, starting with platters. So platter, like I mentioned before, is a circular metallic disk in which magnetic data is stored. So very much similar to a CD-ROM or a DVD-ROM or a Blu-ray. Looks and feels very similar. It's rigid in material, just like those are CD-ROMs and DVD-ROMs. It's hard. It spins quickly using the spindle motor, and that's in this particular picture below. The spindle motor is actually in the middle of the platter itself, and again, it rotates it at a very consistent, fast speed. The data is stored in binary values. It's ones and zeros. Stacked on top of each other, platters can be called, or is what's called a cylinder. So when you have multiple platters together stacked on top of each other, it's called a cylinder. Data on the actual platter is stored on both sides. Next is the read-write head. So the read-write head is responsible for reading and writing data. So it's the very end of the actuator arm in this particular illustration. The head flies above the disk platter at about 3 nanometers. So it's extremely close. So it's even closer. The space between the actual read-write head and the actual platter, I believe, is thin, if not thinner. That space is smaller than a human hair. So extremely close. That read-write head at a very low level detects changes in the magnetic field because magnetic data is stored on the platter, and it converts those changes into electrical current. So those changes within the magnetic field denote binary values of 1 and 0. Head crashes can cause data loss. So if for whatever reason that read-write head touches the platter, is something called a head crash, and most likely you will experience data loss. So it doesn't happen very often, and considering how close it flies, the read-write head above the platter, it's amazing. In most cases, it doesn't happen more. But when it does happen, it typically causes some form of data loss. Next is the actuator arm. So the actuator arm is what the read-write head connects to. And what it does is it moves that read-write head around the platter based off of instructions it receives in terms of where it's A, reading data, so it's locating the data, or B, it's writing data. And that arm controls, while the disk spins, exactly where the head needs to be in order to read and write data. It's controlled by a motor, again, another mechanical component of the hard disk drive. Next, we're going to go into a non-mechanical component, the controller. So the controller is a circuit board where you have a micro CPU and memory. This is where the programming or the firmware is located, the logic that provides intelligence for the disk drive. And at the controller level is where you do things like logical block addressing, or the LBA. The LBA is responsible for logically abstracting the components that make up a physical hard disk drive and putting in a format that, for example, the operating system and the CPU can understand. The block map is just another way to map blocks and data within the hard disk drive. And then finally, health monitoring. Another function of the controller is to provide basic health monitoring. So it has an idea if there is an issue, it can perform, create some kind of alert or some type of action based off of maybe a specific condition in the event of a failure or some other issue. So that covers the basic components of what makes up a physical hard disk drive. See you in the next lesson.